Hello there, good evening. Washington unveils a national security strategy unlike any in 2 decades. A blueprint that signals a profound shift, not just in priorities, but in worldview. For years, the US relied on alliances, diplomacy, and extended deterrence to manage rising powers. But the December 2025 strategy marks a decisive break. America is betting its global leadership on restoring overwhelming military technological superiority to block China from reshaping the Indo-Pacific order, and while the Middle East steadily moves down the priority ladder. Now, the Americas and Latin America as the core theatre of strategic competition, a hemisphere Washington now describes as the front line of competition with China and Russia. But will this high-tech deterrence strategy reshape the roots of US power or expose the internal fractures? And how deep are these changes in shifting America's enduring roots in the Middle East? Today's episode of Think Tank explores this seismic shift in US foreign policy and security.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
Good evening and welcome to the program. On December 4th, 2025, the Trump administration released a new National Security Strategy, or NSS, emphasizing America's first non-interventionism and prioritizing the Western Hemisphere over great power competition with China and Russia. According to Council on Foreign Relations, it criticizes European allies for cultural decline and weak defense, while downplaying Russia as merely an existential threat to Europeans and seeks economic ties with Beijing. The document elevates combating migration, so-called narco-terrorists, and foreign influence in Latin America via a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, proposing military shifts from the Middle East. Council on Foreign Relations experts call it polemical rather than strategic, lacking the 2017 NSS's clarity on Russia and China. It reserves vitriol for US elites and allies. Middle East deprioritization clashes with ongoing engagements like Gaza and Syria. Africa gets thin coverage on trade. Trump's peace claims, like ceasefires, are overstated, with unresolved conflicts persisting, they say. The 2025 National Security Strategy under the Trump administration is widely criticized as incoherent and contradictory, filled with exaggerations, falsehoods, and a lack of clear writing. The Atlantic stated that it swings between internationalist and isolationist views, promising commitment to alliances while promoting America First isolationism. The document shows a disconnect in how it views allies and adversaries, with unclear and confusing rhetoric about China, Russia, and Iran. Despite its flaws, 3 meaningful points emerge: the historic neglect of the Western Hemisphere until crises arise, a misunderstanding of the Monroe Doctrine's original intent, and the document's emblematic populism, reflecting the fragmented Trump coalition. The NSS is seen as lacking coherence, strategic insight, and intellectual rigor, resembling a chaotic mixture of contradictory policies rather than a focused plan, undermining its effectiveness as a national security guide. Now, tonight we break down the strategy, the risks, and the consequences with two experts who stand at the heart of Washington's national security debate. From Washington, Mark Toth, national security and foreign policy expert. And from Virginia, we welcome Dennis Wilder, senior fellow at Georgetown University's Initiative for U.S.-China Dialogue on Global Issues and one of the leading analysts on Chinese strategic behavior. Together, they will help us decode what America's December 2025 strategy truly signals, not only for Beijing and Moscow, but for allies and partners and regions now witnessing a sharp reprioritization of U.S. power. Thank you both for being here with us. I'll start with you, Mark Toth. What would you say, what's your assessment of this document, and what would you say is fundamentally new in this December 2025 national security strategy compared to previous versions?
Thank you for having me back on Qnews, and greetings to you and your viewers, and to Dennis. Look, at high altitude, it's seismic because it's game-changing in terms of what Trump believes that he's going to accomplish with this. But when you really start to pick it apart, it's amateurish, it's contradictory, it's all the things as you described in your lead up to this. For instance, if we take a look at the approach to China, it ridicules past administrations for basically believing that China could be brought into the world of civilized countries through economic trade and the like. Yet on the flip side of that, this is exactly what he's trying to do in Russia with Putin, is basically saying, hey, let's send Steve Witkoff, let's send Jared Kushner, let's them negotiate a business deal and bring Putin back into mainstream Europe, as if the war crimes against humanity and the intentional targeting of civilians in Ukraine hasn't happened. So in my opinion, on a broad overview basis, this is a very muddled and ill-advised plan, especially because it basically undercuts NATO. It basically agrees with Putin and Xi that it's a multipolar world now and that we're back to this hemisphere type approach to spheres of influence. And, for me personally, as someone that grew up through the Cold War, it kind of makes me wonder, look, we won the Cold War to give it all back. Just makes no sense to me overall.
And Dennis Wilder, of the document as a whole.
Well, what I would say is it is definitely a document made by a committee, and a committee that didn't really agree among themselves as to what should be in here. So it is internally contradictory because some people at Defense got to write certain parts of it. Some people at Treasury got to write other parts of it. And of course, you had the president himself and the clear emphasis that he currently has on the Western Hemisphere. So it's a rather confusing document, in part because they really couldn't agree what the national security strategy of the United States should be.
And coming to you, Mark Toth, does this shift redefine America's global posture? And do you agree that it really puts an emphasis on a declining priority when it comes to the Middle East?
Look, its aim is to redefine U.S. national security, though events have a habit of getting in the way of that. I'm not confident it's going to concede in that or achieve that goal. As Dinshin just mentioned here, clearly there are competing elements within on Capitol Hill, but also in the White House, State Department, and the Pentagon that view how the U.S. should proceed differently. Even though he denies it, it's very clear that Marco Rubio, for instance, views a very different path in terms of solving the crisis in Ukraine. So I think that's going to be problematic. I also think as a document ignores the realities that still exist in the Middle East, to answer that part of the question. For instance, it basically assumes, in my opinion, it's too eager to assume that Iran is solved in many ways. Look, Iran is down. Its nuclear program's weapons is down, but it's not out. They've got Russia attempting to help them on the nuclear side. They certainly have China looking to rehabilitate their ballistic missiles program that was decimated by the Israeli strikes. So I think it overlooks that. It overlooks Mideast terrorism, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, those elements that will come back into play. And I think if we broaden it just slightly in terms of Egypt and your listeners there in your country, it's problematic from the standpoint that, for the most part, it ignores the civil war that's going on in Sudan, that impact that has on the Nile region, waterways into your country and the like. So I think it's unfortunate because the Middle East is not yet ready to be deprioritized. You might argue that it can run parallel But I don't think any kind of document like this should be saying that basically the Mideast is no longer a priority. The reality isn't just going to match that in the future, in my opinion.
Dennis Wilder, coming on to China then, what would you say are the main challenges that the US faces in understanding and also responding to China's global security initiative? And what are the broader ambitions to reshape the international order, would you say?
Well, I think as to the document, it is a very tactical look at China rather than what we tried to do in previous documents, a strategic look at China. So what this document really does is set up for President Trump's visit to Beijing, probably next April. It talks an awful lot about trade issues, economic issues with China, and talks very little about what China's goals and intentions are in the world. Now, I think China's goals and intentions in the world are very clear. They want to change the international order that we established 70 years ago. They think that the order that we have in the world favors the West, favors the Western Europeans and the United States, and they want to see a very different international system where, of course, China is one of the leaders. So, for example, if you look at the UN Security Council, the PERM 5 members, are they really reflective of the world today? No. And from China's point of view, that should change. The UN human rights document is, from their point of view, very America-centric in its view of freedoms and democracy. Therefore, for the Chinese, this document is welcomed because it shows that Trump wants to deal with economics and not military competition. But have no illusions. China's goal is to change the international order.
And Mark, back to you. This strategy frames the Americas as the front line in the US-China contest, in kind of almost a Monroe Doctrine-like posture, the Monroe Doctrine being saying that there are two separate spheres of influence, Europe and the Americas. Was that how you would assess it?
Yeah, it's certainly what Trump wants to make it look like. Look, early on in his administration, when issues like Greenland and the Panama Canal came up, I think Trump viewed this as almost a kabuki theater moment to basically say, hey, here's my policy in general. I'm going to make these kind of inflammatory remarks about these two regions in the Western Hemisphere and use that to basically declare hands off, a modern day version of the Monroe Doctrine, if you will. I think in reality, however, there's somewhat a political element, a domestic political element to his play here. It's about narcoterrorism. It's about the import of illegal drugs like cocaine coming mostly from Colombia through Venezuela, and then fentanyl, but fentanyl's not coming from that part of the region. It's coming elsewhere from China, some of it through Canada, for instance. So I think some of it was just a domestic play for him, but I think it's his way of showcasing, and maybe that's the best word to use here, showcasing what he envisions his national security strategy to be going forward, and he's doing that with a show of force right now. Frankly, the largest buildup of U.S. naval power in the Caribbean since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So I think this is just more about, showbiz than necessarily fundamentally trying to change things in the now. Now, don't get me wrong. I think if you look down, you dig down, there are economic initiatives that he wants to do. He wants to make sure that future investment in port facilities, et cetera, in South America and Central America are being made by American companies or in partnership with Central and Latin American entities. And so there is a very real aspect to it. It's all very economic driven. And there is a goal. I think it's a legitimate goal to make sure that critical choke points, whether it's the Panama Canal or down at the end of the world between Antarctica and Argentina, that China doesn't gain control of those waterways. But again, I think it's more of a showcase than exhibit. And from my standpoint, from a national security standpoint, I'll add real quickly here, though, I think it's the wrong hemisphere to overtly say is your number one concern. I think it's a combination of Asia, Europe, and the Mideast.
Yeah, of course, we had that situation with the Panama Canal and Chinese influence there. didn't we, just a little while ago. Dennis, I'm coming to you now. What's the relationship between the US and China now when it comes to technology, especially when we're looking at areas like semiconductors, and then we had the big debacle with TikTok. Where do things stand right now?
Well, this may be the greatest economic competition of the 21st century. Both the United States and China, on the Chinese side, the government, on the US side, our magnificent seven in Silicon Valley, are pouring huge investments into artificial intelligence, quantum, machine learning. And there is really a race in this to see what we can create. No one knows exactly where this leads us all. Some people worry that there can be a super weapon created in this sphere, but this is a competition of great import. And there are debates in the United States, severe debates over exactly how much, in terms of computer chips and advanced capabilities, do we want to share with Chinese companies? Do we want to keep our lead by simply investing and innovating faster than the Chinese? Or do we want to keep the lead by making sure that they don't get a hold of some of our advanced capabilities too quickly, and therefore keep a 1 to 2 generation lead on the Chinese? This is being debated. Trump seems to be more willing to sell to the Chinese because people like NVIDIA are very eager to sell. Others on the national security side in the administration say this is a dangerous move and it will hurt American security. So the competition in technology is huge between the United States and China. It can't be overstated.
And Mark, coming to you again, you were mentioning there about drugs coming in from Latin America. I know you said that fentanyl, of course, not something that's coming in through Venezuela. We have this situation with Venezuela at the moment. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, or War, as he likes to call it, under a lot of heat for what many call extrajudicial killings off the coast of Venezuela. What is the situation there now, and what do you think Trump is hoping to achieve with this military buildup and the threats he's making towards Venezuela?
Yeah, I think as part of this showcase, he wants Venezuela to be Exhibit 1, and he's hoping at a high level that he can get Maduro to leave. Look, the U.S. has had a difficult relationship ever since the days of Hugo Chavez, who roughly came to power around the same time as Putin. And an irony here that many listeners, or I'm sorry, in this case viewers, may not realize is that early on, Putin started arming and training the Venezuelan army. And you've got Russian fighter jets there. You have Russian helicopters there, and there's still trainers on the ground, although there are some reports that they're removing them at this point. And so, there's multiple angles to do there. Iran, for instance, also has different business ties with Venezuela. So I think from Trump's standpoint, I think if he believes he can topple Maduro and his regime, which is a little illegitimate regime, and he basically stole the election from the legitimate winner of it, that's a win for him. And I think it just combines, this is a case where you kind of have domestic policy where there is a very real concern about drugs in the U.S. that he's using on one hand of this showcase, but on the other hand, there are very real geopolitical considerations where he's trying to demonstrate that the U.S. is firmly planting its flag again in South America.
And Dennis Wilder, your view on the situation with Venezuela, is this a drumbeat to war? Or is it just a showcase, as Mark Doth was saying just then? Or will we see a real regime change in Venezuela at the hands of the United States?
I think Trump is going to up the pressure on Venezuela. I don't think necessarily military action in the overt sense, but there is already indications of covert activity by the CIA and others within the country. I believe that the goal is to have Maduro step down, and we'll have to see. I'm no expert on Latin America, but I think the Trump pressure is real and is going to continue, and he's going to use various tools at his disposal to see if he can get Maduro to leave government.
Well, let's come back to China then. Mark Toth, the strategy here assumes that high-tech investment can deter China. But can technology alone restore the balance in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah,
Absolutely
look,
not.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
okay, Dennis, you answer first, and then Mark, you can answer the same question.
Okay. Very quickly, that's not all the United States is doing. I don't think the strategy actually reflects our strategy in East Asia. We have just set up a joint new military command with the Japanese, the first operational wartime command we've ever had with the Japanese. Japanese aircraft, helicopter carriers have been turned into aircraft carriers with F-35s. We're deploying new intermediate range ballistic missiles in the Pacific, in the Philippines, on Japanese islands, elsewhere. So the military buildup in the Pacific is ongoing. The document doesn't say a lot about that, but it is real.
Mark, your view?
yeah, no, I concur with Dennis. Look, when you look at the document itself, the National Security Strategy, it's heavy. There's an acronym, DIME, often augmented by FIL, which basically just describes all the different instruments available as national power to a president. D for diplomatic, I for information, M for the military, and E for the economic side of it. This document is written, and I'm an economist by background early in my career. It strikes me as a document where you had more of the economists at play here than you did, as Dennis just pointed out, articulation of a military strategy. But there is indeed a buildup going on there. The document does, though, allude to the importance of defending the first and second island chains that surround China and enable the U.S. and its allies to make sure that the South China Seas don't become a Chinese sea and that those critical trade waters don't get dominated. So I don't necessarily think that technology alone is going to change this. I don't think that trade is going to change the equation as much as Trump may want that to happen. I really do think you need a robust U.S. military presence with alliances there in that region. And you do need more buy-in from regional partners, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and the Philippines. And as Trump proposes in the national security strategy, India as well. But I think the only question mark there is if you're any of those countries wanting to go all in on China to make sure that you are forming this kind of cohesive collective military deterrent, you're also looking at NATO going, well, the same document undercuts them. Will the U.S. be there in the long run? Obviously, we will be because of the importance of that region to us domestically. I mean, from an economic standpoint and a military standpoint. But, again, that's where the contradictory aspects of Trump's document may undermine the very strategy he's trying to achieve.
Dennis Wilder, China has expanded aggressively into Latin America through loans and infrastructure, high-tech partnerships. What do you think Beijing is making of this national security strategy from the White House?
I think that from Beijing's point of view, it's good news because he emphasizes the economic. As someone said to me from Beijing, we know how to deal with somebody who wants to be transactional and deal with business and money. We're very good at that. So I think what they like about Trump, frankly, is he's non-ideological. He doesn't bring up human rights issues, religious freedom, Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, all of these troublesome issues in the U.S.-China relationship. Rather, he wants to talk about Chinese investment in the United States, China's buying of Boeing aircraft. So I think this document will actually be fairly comfortable. Also, the Taiwan statements are not particularly strong in the document. They reiterate our desire for a status quo, but it isn't, I would say, a robust defense of the Taiwan relationship. I think that will make people a little nervous in Taiwan, Japan, and elsewhere.
Mark Toth, this document reflects growing fears of China-Russia coordination across multiple theaters. How real would you say that coordination is today?
No, I think it's very real. I mean, I've argued for quite a long time that there is a growing ideological partnership between Russia and China. They've called it an ideological war, if you will, that's increasingly becoming kinetic. I think the escapade of Putin's and Ukraine at first was probably a thorn in China's side. But I think as it's moved forward and they realized, because it affected their Belt and Road Initiative that they wanted to accomplish. Many of those key nodes, railroad nodes, go through Ukraine and were supposed to connect Chinese trade with the EU, and that all got disrupted. But as the war has played on, I think China realizes that there's technology to be gained from the battlefields in Ukraine. Russia is starting to learn. We're seeing different tactics come about from them, different introduction of drones and the like that they didn't have at the beginning of the war. And I think China sees value in that. I also think China, in an odd way in this relationship, but nonetheless very useful to them, is also seeing that a weaker Russia in some ways militarily creates a stronger China in the eastern part of Russia, in the Siberia and the like, and that's a plus for China given past Russian-Chinese border disputes. So I do think there's a growing ideological thing there. It's not just Russia and China. You do see it with the partnership with North Korea, with Iran, where you've had direct influences there. So I think it's very much still cohesive. I think it's still there. I think the Trump administration is naive to think that they're going to pull Putin away from that relationship. It's just too beneficial to him. And at this point, China is his only real economic lifeline outside of oil sales. So I think this relationship will continue, and it'll still be a threat to the West.
And Dennis Wilder, what does all this mean for Taiwan?
For Taiwan, they have had concerns for a while about Trump's inattention to the issues. He doesn't speak to the question of democracy versus autocracies the way Biden and other American presidents have. He doesn't see Taiwan in those terms. He sees it again as an economic issue. His only concern really is the semiconductor industry on Taiwan and making sure we have access to it. But for Taiwan and for those in the administration who are very supportive of Taiwan, I think they're going to continue to have to battle against Trump's predilection to leave the Taiwan issue aside, to cut trade deals with Beijing, to get $1 trillion of Chinese investment into the United States. And so I think in Taiwan, they're going to look for a greater support for Taiwan. They'll go through their friends on Capitol Hill. The president just signed a bill that is fairly meaningless, but is a symbolic support for Taiwan. They're going to try and put a firewall against what seem to be Trump's instincts to really play down our support for Taiwan.
And Mark Toft, does this have implications for U.S. alliances like with NATO?
No, I think it does. I mean, I think it even muddles the discussion that's going on in Taiwan itself. The name eludes me right now. My apologies to viewers, but the Taiwanese opposition leader just came out and said that maybe Taiwan needs to seriously consider rapprochement with China and to remember its Chinese identity, its culture, and the like. And so I think that's difficult. And I do think it long-term causes problems with NATO, because NATO could have been an effective partner with the U.S. in either expanding, not necessarily NATO itself, but align with a similar type defensive organization in the Indo-Pacific. And there could have been great partnership there. And there should be, because logistics, when it comes to national security and the movements of military around the world, and we still are the only force projection military in the world at this point. China's trying to get there, but they can't do it yet. Europe and all those NATO bases form a key part of that logistics change. So it definitely affects NATO, not in a good way.
And Dennis Wilder, finally, does this shift really put an end to the United States going out there into the world promoting democracy, and it really has entered the era of transactional deal-making?
Well, certainly for the next 3 years. Of course, we can't think beyond that point because there could be a real reversal of this kind of Trump policy. Trump is, a very unusual, unconventional American president. And what he's doing today is extremely unconventional. So I'm not sure. It depends, I guess, who is the next president of the United States, whether this is a sustained policy or not.
Maybe it's Donald Trump who's going to be the next president of the United States. Let's see. Mark Toft, Dennis Wilder, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us here on the program. Your perspectives have really helped illuminate the stakes behind this new U.S. strategy. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank, which always unveils the complexities of our changing world. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more here on Q News.